Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, Channel's Business Global has an exclusive interview with the former president of Mauritius, Dr. Ameenah Gurib-Fakim. The state of environmental emergency has been declared on the island nation as it's suffering from a major ecological disaster. A Japanese-owned bulk carrier ran aground near the island in late July, carrying 4,000 tonnes of fuel oil and 200 tonnes of diesel. Mauritius relies heavily on its waters for fishing and tourism. And Zimbabwe has confirmed that foreign white farmers settled in the country, whose land was seized under former President Robert Mugabe, can apply to get that land back. I'll be discussing the reaction to this symbolic U-turn with Africa analyst Tamsang Kajo. Then later, I'll be speaking with Jamil Ahmed, Director of Investment Strategy at tech investment firm Naga, about the surge in tech stocks this week. Apple's market value is now £1.65 trillion, more than the total value of the other 99 companies on the index. Now over to our main discussion, and for this I'm being joined by the former president of Mauritius, Dr. Ameenah Gurib-Fakim. Mauritius is currently under a state of environmental emergency following an oil spill into a sanctuary for rare wildlife from the Japanese ship MV Wakishio, which struck a coral reef on the 25th of July. There have been major protests in the capital, led by environmental campaigners demanding for action from the government. Dr. Ameenah Gurib-Fakim, it's such an honour to have you on Channel's Business Global. Thank you so much. And it's a really devastating time, isn't it, for Mauritius? Of course, in July, there was that major oil spill, but the story has developed over the past couple of days. Can you please tell us what exactly is taking place on the ground?
Thank you, Juliana. Thank you for having me. Thank you also for giving us that voice that we desperately need to take our message out to the international community. We know before July, we had COVID. The whole world witnessed COVID. We managed to come out of it, well, reasonably well, although we've had deaths. But the event that has panned out since July, 25th of July, when the ship, the Wakashio, hit our reef. And still, there was no cause for alarm on the 25th of July, because we've had previous crashes before, but they have all been resolved pretty well, and there has never been any oil spill whatsoever. But the ship sat there from 25th of July till the 6th of August, when we started hearing in the news that oil has started to leak out of the Wakashio. And on the 7th of August, when I went to the beach, I was horrified. I was horrified for many reasons. I was horrified as a scientist, which I am, and I could see, I could actually gauge the damage that it will do. I was horrified because this was my home, and I grew up in that village. So it hit me really personally as well. And since then, it's been one after the other. It's been a roller coaster of events. And we've tried to get the oil out. We still don't know as a date the exact volume of oil that has spilled into this part of our country, in our waters. And yesterday, in fact today, I went to the funeral of 3 seamen. And they had been working on this barge. There was an accident, and 4 have been, 3 died, and 1 is still reported missing. So this is where we are. And of course, in between, we've had so many dolphins washing up our coast. These dolphins are our friends. They have sustained the livelihoods of so many people because people go dolphin watching in our waters. And so now we have over 40 of these mammals, some of them with babies, some of them young ones. They have all washed up on our coast dead.
Absolutely, it's such a horrible story. I haven't, fortunately, yet been to Mauritius, but of course everybody knows it's very popular for its pristine beaches, and we know just how much the society depend on those blue, crystal clear waters for tourism and for fishing. And I know a state of environmental emergency was recently called by the Prime Minister, and there has been mass protests. We've seen thousands of people led by environmental campaigners marching out of the streets, asking for answers, saying that the government were too slow to respond. You alluded there by saying you first heard about the disaster, really, from the media. Do you agree with the sentiment, with the anger from locals?
You know, this has been the straw that broke the camel's back, right? Seeing these dolphins washing up our coast. And it shows that there has been a dysfunctional somewhere. The institution haven't worked properly. And I think when people took this to the street, and I think this was the biggest ever march this country has known, with over 150,000 people marching on the streets of the capital. But over and above this, we've had the diaspora that has also synchronized their protests across the world as well. And I think what they were calling for, they were rallying call for a more transparent society, for more transparent decision, for less cronyism, for less nepotism, for less corruption. I mean, these are the rallying calls from so many countries across the world. And the last one we saw was in Beirut, right? So this is what people are asking for. And interestingly, Juliana, is that this rally saw massive participation of young people. So I think they know what's at stake. Their future is at stake. And this is something that we, as leaders or past leaders or as elders, we have to take good note of that, because it's a call for us to own up to past mistake, but more importantly, to put the institution back on the rail so that they work and deliver on their expectation and their aspirations.
Absolutely. I believe the majority of our viewers will echo that statement there. Now, we know that the government have requested that Japan pay a total of 1.34 billion Mauritian rupees, which is equivalent to about 3.6 billion yen. I have seen some would describe it as propaganda images that the Japanese government have been putting out, basically showing that Mauritius waters haven't really been affected. How far are the administration with these discussions? Do you think the Japanese will pay out?
Well, you know, this is something which is not just legal, but also moral, right? Now, there are responsibilities on all parts. There are responsibilities on the shipping companies, the Japanese who own the ship. There are responsibilities which are also tied up to the regulators. There are responsibilities which are also tied up to the country where this ship was registered. And of course, there are responsibilities from our side as well. Why did it take so long to actually ring the alarm bells? Now, also at our level, we are signatories to many conventions, and we also need to see where, to what extent these have been ratified so that we can fully implement. But now we're going to have to start really collecting the samples, establish the baseline study and the database, so that when we go to court, because this is a long drawn out affair, it's not going to stop here. And of course, there'll be a lot of squabbling as to how much they're going to pay. But the urgency right now is to see how we can help those people who desperately need help. And this is something which is not, ringing in the appropriate quarters, be it in Japan, be it anywhere else. These are the people whose livelihoods have been impacted already with the COVID, because we mustn't forget that Mauritius' economy is 24% tourism. And the country is still closed. The airspace is still closed. The hotels are closed. So what do people do? And so when we emerge out of the COVID, now we have to look at the messaging that we have to send out to the world in terms of now a pollution which we could have averted.
Dr. Amina Gurib-Fakim, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. Thank you. In other news now, Zimbabwe has confirmed that foreign white farmers settled in the country, whose land was seized under former President Robert Mugabe, can now apply to get that land back. Under Zimbabwean laws passed during a short period of opposition, foreign farmers protected by treaties between their governments and Zimbabwe are now eligible to apply for compensation for both land and other assets, a symbolic U-turn to a divisive policy. For more on this, I'm now being joined by African analyst Tamzane Kajo. Tamzane Kajo, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. I've got to say I was pretty surprised, although I'm sure it was a long time coming, when the press announced this week that eligible white farmers who had their land seized during the Mugabe regime can reclaim that land. Tell me about this.
Well, Juliana, the Constitution of Zimbabwe, I think it's section 295, does explicitly include that if you were an indigenous Zimbabwean who lost your land during the course of that redistribution land program, then you have a right to claim your land back. But also, if you are a foreign national, I think it's very important to make that distinction. If you are a foreign national whose title to land was covered by a bilateral treaty. So in just a quick example, there are German nationals or Swiss nationals or French nationals or British nationals who bought land in Zimbabwe, who acquired land in Zimbabwe after independence, after 1980, with the government of Robert Mugabe, where the Zimbabwean government had a bilateral internationally binding treaty between Switzerland or Germany or Britain or any other of those countries so that they can secure that land. It's called the Bilateral Investment Promotion and Protection Agreement. So this is exactly what Zimbabwe is talking about. It's not talking about reversing the land program as we know it. It's simply saying as part of that program, there is land that belongs to those that acquired it under the bilateral treaties with other countries, and also indigenous Zimbabweans who used their own monies to buy land after independence, who had also lost their land. Those ones, they have a right to claim their land back, or where it is no longer feasible, get compensation for both the land and the improvements on it, Julian.
Thank you for that detail, Tam, but let's call a spade a spade. These are white farmers, aren't they? And of course, I know there are some, many in fact, who would have said that this Mugabe policy was divisive. But then, of course, there are so many others, not just in Zimbabwe, but across Africa and Pan-Africa, that saw this as a great symbolic statement, you know, reversing these archaic rules and laws which gave white individuals power over blacks in their own country.
It's actually the other way around. I mean, to be fair, even to Robert Mugabe, I had problems with him as a president because of what he did to my people. But I think if you go back, it was always clear that those that were covered by the bilateral agreements, foreign nationals of other countries who had been invited to Zimbabwe by the government of the country to invest and procure land, especially in agriculture, be part of that mantra of saying Zimbabwe is the bread basket of Africa, then their land was protected. In other words, what President Emmerson Mnangagwa is doing now is just proving to the world that if you invest in Zimbabwe, whatever the circumstances, Zimbabwe is a country that believes in rule of law, that will protect your property rights, that will protect your investment. This is what this is all about. The greater part of the land that was taken because of the colonial times, taken from the local people of Zimbabwe, and then retaken back after 2000 in the main. That's not the land we are talking about. We are only talking about the foreign nationals who were invited to invest in Zimbabwe in the agriculture sector, and we promised them as a country that their investments were secure, their property rights were secure. So President Mnangagwa is just giving a statement out to the world that Zimbabwe is a country that believes in law and order and respect of the rule of law. And it is also in the Constitution. Section 295 does exactly say whoever is running the country should protect the property rights of those that are outside. So in other words, it's simply saying if you, Juliana or anybody, go and invest in Zimbabwe, your property rights will be secure. Your investment will be protected by the state, whatever the political situation in the country.
Tam Zenko, as always, thank you very much. Coming up on Channel's Business Global, I'll be discussing the extraordinary week for tech stocks with Jamil Ahmed of the German fintech investment company Naga. See you after the break. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a moment, I'll be speaking with Jamil Ahmed of the German fintech investment company Naga. But before then, here's some company news for you. Samsung heir Lee Ye-yong is facing fresh charges over his role in a 2015 merger deal at the tech giant. South Korean prosecutors accused Lee, 52, of using stock and accounting fraud to try to gain control of the Samsung Group, claims Mr. Lee denies. In 2017, Lee was found guilty of separate charges over the deal, including bribery, but his 5-year prison sentence was later suspended. He is unlikely to be held in custody as he awaits trial on the new charges. Facebook is preparing to block news content in Australia in response to new regulations which would force social media platforms to pay publishers for their articles. The Australian government announced plans in July to force Facebook and Google to pay royalties to news publishers for reusing their content. The two companies globally collect roughly 70% of media advertising revenue, which has historically underpinned the traditional news industry. German lawmakers launched a parliamentary inquiry into the collapse of payments firm Wirecard earlier this week in an effort to force the government to reveal more about a failure to avert the country's biggest post-war corporate fraud. The investigation into the implosion of a company once seen as a German success story worth $28 billion will increase pressure on German Chancellor Angela Merkel and her deputy Olaf Scholz ahead of national elections next year. Now, over to our next topic. Technology has been a lifeline for all of us during lockdown, and company results out this week have affirmed their economic dominance. Let's discuss the details with Jamil Ahmed, Director of Investment Strategy at tech investment firm Naga. Jamil Ahmed, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. It's been a while, but since the last time we spoke, it seems as if, if you're going to put your money anywhere, it's got to be in tech stock. What a week for Apple. If we look at their ranking on the FTSE 100, they've completely amassed all of the value of the 99 other biggest listed companies on the FTSE trading in Britain. Tell me more about that.
Well, Juliana, the old cliche that technology has taken over the world, no matter what we say today and yesterday, it's never proven more true in the future. And in fact, the technology stocks overall in 2020, this pandemic has just driven this surge where I think that life circumstances and our demand for technology, whether that's through streaming devices on television or through applications on our phone, it's driven the consumer change maybe 10 years ahead of time, because we've seen such sharp moves in the technology sector in 2020 that it's astonishing, it's remarkable. I just give you a few examples of this. Apple is now worth $2 trillion. It's actually more than this. The first ever US company to reach this milestone. And the fun fact here is that actually the second trillion, it was worth 1 trillion 2 years ago. It managed to make another 1 trillion in just under 2 years. And this is a company that's been around for 40 years. So that demand for the technology sector, and we can talk about Facebook, we can talk about Netflix, you've got Alphabet, the parent of Google, Microsoft that could be purchasing TikTok. There's just so excitement around technology stocks now that we're seeing that, this is what investors want at the dinner table. They want to say goodbye to, or at least I see you later, to some other consumer stocks, and they just love tech. They are in love with tech.
Thank you for that, Jamil. Gosh, if we could put any other names or brands in that, but they're all doing really well. So thank you for that. And thank you for reminding us that Apple is 40 years old. My goodness, the legacy of Steve Jobs truly lives on. You didn't mention Zoom. We've got to talk about Zoom. They've had, again, another record-breaking week. Their Q2, no surprises to anybody, even our grandmas have heard of Zoom, has been phenomenal. But there are some that suggest, that this may not be sustainable. People are returning to work. What else are they going to be offering people?
Well, this is the thing. If you look at the technology itself, it's easily can really be repeated somewhere else. It's not something that's completely discrete and sensitive. Skype's been around for years, and so have other competitors. But the thing is that Zoom has become this household brand in the past 3 to 6 months. Before this pandemic, nobody had really heard of Zoom. But now we're using it for talking to relatives. We're using it to talk to people overseas. We're talking to our colleagues, our international work colleagues as well. But I do think that even as employees do return to the office, Zoom has now become your thing to use. You know, it's no longer just about FaceTime, it's become this alternative to Skype. So I do think that Zoom will remain popular. But the thing is, when you look at a valuation perspective, the amount of hundreds of percentages that Zoom has added to its stock value in 2020, again, it just shows that love for stocks. But overall, you know, its sales in the past 3 months for Q2, it was double what it was for Q1 2020, and it beat everything altogether from 2019. So can the valuations in terms of revenues go that much higher? Probably not. But can the popularity maintain? I do think so, because people have adapted to using Zoom now.
People have adapted to using Zoom. There are obviously other video conference platforms out there. I'm not sure what the names are of many of them. Zoom really have got a major monopoly on the market. Let's talk about Tesla. Tesla has also dominated headlines over the past couple of months, no less because of its flamboyant billionaire CEO, Elon Musk, who's actually in Europe at the moment. He was in Germany on Wednesday. In the past 3 weeks alone, the price has surged 50%. But again, even kind of similar to the Zoom question, can a stock price ever be too much?
For Tesla, yes. And I'll give you this example. The CEO, as flamboyant, as extravagant, and as well known as he is, even him himself earlier this year caused his own stock value to crash with a famous tweet that, in my opinion, the Tesla stock is valued too high. So you can't rule out that happening again because he's done it himself before. But the thing is, now Elon Musk is the third richest person on the planet. So power to the people and power to the underdog, because there were so many people who did say that you would not be able to achieve this, and yet he's still achieving it. But to give you just a few numbers towards the stock price and the volatility in Tesla, the past 2 weeks, you've said 50%. I can tell you that in year to date, 2020, it's up by 460%. And in fact, in the last 1 year alone, it is up by 1,000%. So this kind of volatility, it shouldn't continue, and it can continue. But in fact, you know, the other automobile industries and their CEOs, the ones of public companies, are going to be saying, you know, where is the love? Because Tesla has only just become profitable. There's other really established names out there, but in fact, investors just love to go to Tesla.
They love to go to Tesla. We're running out of time, Jamil, but before you go, because we've got you on the show, let me ask, what are some of the other exciting tech brands that we haven't mentioned? Because we're all mentioning those household names. We didn't mention Amazon, did we? And Jeff Bezos, and he's amassed wealth. But what are some of the other kind of, you know, startup brands or good tech brands that are catching your attention?
Well, actually, the most recent one has been Microsoft. And that's because, you know, Microsoft, again, like Apple, is a very traditional tech company, but in fact is going into a very interesting path. Because as we all know and have seen in the news, President Trump in the United States has signed this executive order to ban TikTok, you know, the Chinese social media phenomenon that just emerged out of nowhere, from the United States, and other countries are following suit. And it appears that Microsoft are in very big talks to potentially acquire TikTok. And I think this is going to be an interesting move to them, because you've seen the emergence of Facebook. Obviously, Google have moved into the social media industry as well over the past couple of years. So it does show some dynamic approach from a traditional computer software company and other technology avenues. And I do think that TikTok is something to watch, and specifically investors are liking the Microsoft share price as well.
Jamil Ahmed, Director of Investment Strategy at NAGA. Thank you so much for joining me on Channels Business Global. I look forward to catching up with you again on more tech stock news. Thank you. Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.